Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I think I'm going to do kind of a textured band with a pretty marquee stone. I picked out a pretty marquee amethyst stone for it. I'm going to create just a kind of a simple prong setting and set it on top of a kind of a deeply hammered band. I'm going to use my dapping punches to hammer it instead of just using a peen. So before we get started on that, I wanted to thank some people. My patrons on Patreon are my core group of supporters. I have a new one, Jeannie M. Thank you for signing up. I look forward to getting to know you over there, and I think you'll find that that's a great group of people over there as well. So thank you all for being my supporters. I could not do this without you. The other group is my YouTube subscribers. We just passed 24,000, which is amazing. Thank you for that. I really love the nice comments I get from people, and when I find out from someone that I've helped them, that really makes this worthwhile to me. So thank you for sharing that kind of stuff and telling me some of your stories. So I really do appreciate the comments. I also appreciate the financial support that people give me, like buying me a coffee or super thanks, or buying my ebooks or my merch. All of that stuff really makes my channel sustainable, and I appreciate it a lot. So, all right, well, let's get started on this project. So this is one of my design idea sketchbooks, and you can get these on my merch store. There's a number of different types. This one has a gauge to inches to millimeters chart on the back, which I find pretty useful. And the real feature that I like about these things is the dot matrix in the background, so I can draw better pictures, because I draw things asymmetrically, not intentionally. So, but it's a great way to keep track of your projects. I didn't used to do this, and I really appreciate the fact that now I can go back and say, oh, that's how I did that, or oh, that's the gauge that I used, because I kind of write down what I use for each time anymore. So that was something I learned from doing YouTube videos. I taught myself a better process. Alright, so this is kind of what I had in mind. I was waiting for we just had a bunch of stuff done in our basement here, so I couldn't film for a couple of days because we had some plumbing and some duct work being done. And so while I was waiting for them to finish upstairs today, I drew some stuff up here, and I was just kind of brainstorming for some different kinds of shanks. And I finally kind of went in a different direction, and I decided to do a marquee stone, because I haven't done one of those for a while, and I thought I'd make kind of a simple but really heavily hammered band. And I'm going to use a dapping punch instead of just a peen hammer to really dig some texture in there. I have an example like here. This is what I did with a dapping punch, so you get some really deep dimples in it, and you can do them kind of in random patterns. They don't have to be consistent. You can make it look pretty organic, I think. So we'll do that. I already kind of measured out the length for it. I chose about an 8, which is probably a bad choice because my wife is about a size 8, and I may end up not having a ring to sell. So that's okay. She can have whichever one she wants, though. So I measured around the mandrel at an 8, and I left a little gap in the middle. So this should get us pretty close. When we do hammer the band of the ring here, it may actually stretch it a little bit because we're going to be hitting it pretty hard, and that will deform the metal and push it outwards a little bit. Since I cut it pretty exact, I may have to trim off a little bit to get it just where I want, but we'll see. It'll give me a little bit of fudge room, I think. After we're done with that, I'm going to kind of taper these ends in like this. But before we even do the band, I think let's make the setting for the stone. I'm going to do kind of a very simple prong setting, at least I'm going to try. So it seems like every time I do a prong setting anymore, I do something slightly different. So, but the good thing is you can always come up with new ways to do things. Right? Oh, I didn't even measure the stone. Let's see how big it is. I had to spend the first part of my evening trying to recreate a space to film in. Okay, so we got about what does it look like? Wow, that's like a 15 millimeter by, let's see, 7 maybe, 15 by 7. I guess that's about right, 15 by 7. Close enough. Okay, so what I decided to use for the materials were, I'm going to use 18 gauge sheet which, as you know right now, silver is pretty expensive. So you could probably get by with 20 if you want to save yourself a little money. But you don't want to get too thin, because then after you polish and everything, it's going to feel kind of fragile, so delicate. I like a little thicker, chunkier ring myself. For the base of the setting for this Marquise, I'm going to use some flattened 14 gauge wire. I rolled this out in my rolling mill, but you could, if you don't have a rolling mill, you could actually just hammer it flat, or you could use a thin strip of sheet. That's about 0.65 millimeters, so this must have been a different time. Okay, so, but it doesn't have to be exact. You can make it kind of a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner, it doesn't matter. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to make a shape just like the stone, hopefully. So it's just about the same size as the width of the stone, the girdle. So if I was to set the stone on top of it once I made it, it would be right to the edge, but not visible from above, if that makes sense. So I think we'll start by, let's file one of these ends flat. Okay, if you haven't been to my channel before, I use a hard silver sheet solder, and I use that most of the time, but I occasionally use a little bit of paste solder anymore. I use a liquid flux that I drop on with a dropper bottle. And my torch is a Silversmith model. It's their acetylene air torch. It pulls in atmospheric air to mix with the gas rather than having straight oxygen. So it's not as hot as an oxyacetylene, but it's hotter than a propane or a butane torch generally. So it's a good torch for silversmithing, I think. All right, so let's find. Oh, the other thing I forgot to say is I weighed this stuff out since silver is so expensive right now, just so you get an estimate of how much silver it's going to take. And I estimated, but this is pretty close. I'll be cutting some of this off of here, and I may not use all of this wire. We'll see. I don't think I'll need all of the wire, but it'll be pretty close. So, and that came out to 0.34 troy ounces. I'll put the gram measure up in the video when I edit the video. So let's file this flat. And I'll make sure this is relatively flat too, and not too wavy in this dimension either. Nobody wants a weird looking setting. What would people say? Probably So if I get the curve just right, I can get it pretty close. I'm going to make a mark with a Sharpie-like marker. It's a Sharpie-like marker. Let's just file that flat for giggles. That looks pretty good, I think. So let's make another one just like that, shall we? You could do this like over a ring mandrel if you wanted to do it, you know, that way. If you're one of those sorts. Just kidding. Those are good sorts. Actually, you know what? I don't need the marker for this one. Let's just set it next to it. Make sure we're lined up at the end, and we'll have them both the same length. Or pretty close, if I didn't have great big clumsy fingers. Oh, I still won't mark it, I guess. We'll do it left-handed. Okay, I don't know if we'll be right on, but we'll be close. Let me find my little stone grabby thing. It's good when you're a silversmith if you know the technical terms. Like the, oops, like the stone grabby thing. That's right. Okay. So I can tell just by looking at it that we could stand to be just slightly smaller. So I think what I'll do is, these ends need to be filed flat anyway. So let's just do that, and then we'll put them together and see how it looks. So I'm going to use my miter vise jig for this, because that's a nice way to get something pretty consistent, if you have one of these. If you don't, I don't think they're too expensive. Mine was a cheap one, so I think it was $60 or something. You should probably spring for the better ones, though. I would, in hindsight, because there's some that have 60-degree angles too. As a beginner, I would have really liked to have known about these things. I don't even know if they existed when I first started, but if anybody knows when they first came out, I'd be curious. So I only found out about these after about 30 years of doing this. So. Pretty close. Stone grabber thingy, there you are. I think that's pretty good, actually. Let's solder it together and see how it looks. After we do that, if it looks like it's a good size, we can make one that's just slightly smaller than that. Okay, I have a little bit of solder left over from last time, so I'll just use that. I guess maybe I should turn my torch on. This project will probably be intermediate to advanced because I'm making a prong setting from scratch. So you might want to have a few projects under your belt before you try this one. Pick, there you are. So this is called pick soldering, and it's a skill that the sooner you master it, I think the easier things become. So I'm just going to use my soldering pick to pick up a little melted ball of solder, heat the piece to the point where it is hot enough for the solder to flow, touch the solder where it goes, and it should just jump on there if I've timed it right. If you're interested in seeing a video about that, I have a pretty good one right there. That is one of those skills that kind of moved me up a level, or two. Okay, so let's pick up a little bit of this solder. There we go. Sometimes the hardest part on pick soldering is getting the solder on the pick. Okay, so my biggest mistake is I jump in there too soon because I get impatient. So just want to watch the other thing. Once there's one solder joint, it's easier to tell because you can watch the other solder joint. So when it starts to get liquid looking, then you know it's about there. See how it's starting to get shiny over there. I've had some of the nicest things said to me by people on my channel lately. thank you all for that. That's really nice when people say stuff like that. I am glad that people are finding some value here. Okay, now that we have it together, we can kind of set it on there and see how it looks. I think we're pretty good on the size. I think instead of actually tapering this one, since it's so close, if I got it a little smaller, I might be able to kind of stretch this and flare it out at the top a little bit with something, with just using some pliers, probably. But I think I'm just going to file it so it's got a little bit of an angle to it. So we're making an executive decision right now. If it helps you to brace your piece you're filing against something, feel free to do that. This has got a pretty thick girdle on this one. Interesting. I think that's probably pretty good. See, now it's got a little bit of a taper downwards. So now we need to make one that's a little bit smaller than that, and that'll be the base. And then we need to connect them with our prongs, which we're going to make out of this 16 gauge round like this. So I think I want to make it like kind of not that size. So we'll do the same thing we did with that, just on a smaller scale. One of the other keys to pick soldering is making sure both pieces are up to the temperature you want them to be, otherwise it'll jump on the one that is, like that. I'd like to say I demonstrated that for you on purpose, but I didn't. One boat, two boats. I think I'm going to do the same thing I did with that one, except it's going to be harder to hold on to. Okay, so here's the thing. We want these prongs we're going to put in here to join at the kind of on either side of the tip of the bottom one, and then on either side of the tip of this one too. So I think we're going to use a soft surface. This it's a kiln block, a soft kiln block, and we can push some prongs into it while this is on the surface, and then that'll allow us to get ready to position the other one up above it and try and get it nice and straight. So let's do that next. So I'm going to cut some more prongs here. That should be about the right length. 5/8 of an inch. What would that be like? So I'm going to try and kind of poke these in. At an angle like that. Sometimes it takes me a couple of tries to get these lined up how I want them to be, because things like that happen. Let's quick flux it and solder it before anything moves. Got a little close on one of those prongs there. There's always got to be one troublemaker, right? So I want to try and get this down where it's within like a millimeter or two. So I don't want it to stick up too high. So I'm going to keep playing with these angles until I get it to sit where I want it to sit. Here's what I think I'm going to do in order to get this. So I've not done it quite like this before, but it was be a good experiment. Get kind of where I want it like that. I'm going to try and make a mark where each of these prongs is. Normally I notch the prongs or something to get it to sit down in there nice, but I think I'm going to notch the bottom side of this. See how that works. Kind of notch, kind of like this. So the big trade-off with using one of these little blocks like this is that part of the piece is buried in it, and so it's kind of insulated from the heat. And since you really want it to kind of all reach the right temperature, which in the case of hard solder is 1450 Fahrenheit-ish. Having part of that buried in the insulating block makes it hard to get that to happen. I think they're all soldered. I'm just adding a little bit to be sure. I think I can make that work. We shall see. So I'm going to cut off the bottom pieces though. Okay. A couple ways I can deal with this one that ended up being a little bit short. I could either start over, which is probably what I should do, but I'm going to make this platform a little bit lower, and that'll give me a little bit more room here. I also, I can take my saw and file in there. This is separated out from that just a skosh, and if I can push that in a little bit closer, that'll resolve some of the issue, I think. So, not the best one I've ever made, but the idea is sound, I think. I just need to execute it a little bit better next time. So yeah, we'll see how it turns out. But now we need to make a band, so I'm going to chuck this in the pickle for a little while. And where'd that piece of silver? Here's this piece of silver. So where's my little pattern go? There it is. I'm just going to glue it on, and then I'm going to use the shears to cut this out probably. I'll let that sit for a minute or two. So like I said, I'm not even going to bother with the saw on this one. I can get by with these little craft shears. You don't want to cut, if you're using shears to do this instead of a saw, you can use a saw if you'd like. But if you do this, you don't want to cut all the way to the end of the line because you'll cut into the piece because of the nature of shears. So don't do that. Okay, so now we get to do something sort of therapeutic. So let's use one of these dapping punches and see how this goes. So I'm going to be doing this for a while, so I'm not going to subject you to watching me do the entire thing, but I'll be right back in a minute when it's done. So I went ahead and I filed these at an angle like that. Hopefully I got them pretty close to the same. I think this end is slightly wider. By pounding this, it's made it really stiff and hard to bend, and so we're going to anneal this, which is to heat it up just a skosh, and let it cool, and that'll soften the metal back up. I'm going to try and get it up to kind of a dull red color. Just a little bit of a reddish hue to it. Just let it cool off. Alright, well, let's shape this a little bit. I'm going to start down at the bottom of the mandrel here. Alright, let's see if we can get this lined up nicely. So I want these, number one, I want these to be straight up and down. And I noticed these were slightly uneven down here. These ones stuck out a little further than these ones. So I filed it inwards a little bit so they'd be more a straight line. So I think I'll do this. These kind of more vertically aligned. That's not bad. I think I like that. I like that more than I expected. Okay, well, let's see if we can get that soldered in. I'm going to do a little bit of creative filing on here to make this fit perfectly, or at least as close as I can. So, sometimes you put something in one way and it's crooked, and then you pop it in the other way just because of slight variations in your, making process. And it looks better this way than it looked the other way. So let's solder it in like that. I think I'm going to use some paste solder on this particular one. So try and kind of put it up there so nothing can move too much. Hopefully. Let's use a little bit of medium, I think. Back here. Have an escapee. Alright. I don't know if I had it on there. Will it cause me problems, soldered line? I don't know. So there's quite a bit more mass in this band than there is in the setting. So most of the heat's going to be put into the band because that'll take longer to get up to the solder temperature than will the top piece. Now let's make sure nothing moved on us or did anything weird. First letters of consecutive words. I don't remember what it is. So I'm likely going to, with my Dremel and a ball burr, taper this in a little bit so the stone sits down a skosh. I may file the top of it first a little bit shorter as well in order to deal with that short prong. So here's kind of an idea of what it's going to look like. I think that'll be kind of a pretty ring. What do you think? So like I said, I need to narrow this down a little bit because I think it's slightly wider on that side. We may not have to do anything with that prong. We'll see. I may have just enough. So I'll be back in a few after I go feed my wife, and then we can finish this up. Okay, I cut the prongs a little bit shorter. I usually cut them to where they're about the length of where they go halfway up. The girdle facets are the ones there. Like I said, I used a ball burr to kind of hollow out the inside of that so it's tapered downwards a little bit so the stone sat down slightly. And I kind of started putting it in there because I wanted to make sure it was straight and everything. So now I use the flat side of this to kind of push prongs down. I can get quite a bit of leverage on that. Again, you want to be a little careful when you're doing this kind of thing, especially with something with sharp points like a Marquise. It can be a little bit delicate. You can even kind of burnish it a little bit to make sure it's down tight on there. And I'll kind of refine the tips of these into more of a sharp point. And I'll use a blue, an abrasive blue silicone wheel, which is at the kind of the fine end of things, so that'll smooth this out pretty nice and the prongs will look good. But that's basically what I was doing and what I wanted to do, so I'm pleased with the outcome. I give myself an A- on that one. Tell me what you think. I'm always interested in how people do things, so if you have a different way you do stuff, I'd like to hear about it. But either way, thanks for watching. Okay, well that was a heavily hammered Marquise Amethyst ring. I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but we'll come up with something. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go. And I would love it if you would take a moment and check out my main channel page. I have 540 plus videos now. I do 3 per week, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, and one on Saturday. So there's a constant stream of content coming out. Some of it actually pretty good, I think. So check out a few videos, come back, subscribe to my channel. I would love to have you as a follower. There's no fee for that. And you can get notifications of when I release a new video. Also, don't forget to check out the video description down below. There's some important links there, as well as information about this video. There's a link to my Patreon if you want to find out more about that community. There's multiple tiers of membership there. Lowest one being getting rid of the YouTube ads, and the ones above that have additional perks like live streams and content made specifically for Patreon. So it's also got a nice group of people you can interact with, and it's really a nice place to share ideas and learn. So check that out. There's also a link to my merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks. Those are super handy and are a great way to keep track of your projects. And there's a link to my ebooks. My 2024 is having some 170 plus pages with links to the videos that they're talking about, and include things like a picture of my sketch, a picture of the final product, a list of materials that it took to make the project, a difficulty rating, albeit a little bit subjective on my part, and then some notes I made about the project, like did I learn something, or would I do it differently next time, that sort of thing. So it's a really nice way to have a whole bunch of projects right at your fingertips, and a super nice way to support my channel. So thank you in advance if you do that. I will appreciate it. Okay, well thanks for watching today. Take care. Happy silversmithing.